I think we finished John Williams, right? We got eaten by cannibals. All right. So we're ready for John Patton today, I think.
Yeah.
All right. All right, let's have a word of prayer and we'll get underway. Thank you, Father, for the privilege of knowing Christ. Thank you for these servants who have been faithful, and even though they all were flawed, you used them and you made a difference through them. And I pray that you would help us to have that same longing to be used of God, to see the glory of God, the beauty of God as our motivation for service. We ask for your direction this morning in Jesus' name. All right. There we go. All right, John Patton. Now don't mix this guy up with David Livingston's father-in-law. Remember what his name was?
Wasn't it Robert Moffat?
Robert Moffat. They look a lot alike, don't they? Although I think Moffat won the beard contest. But and I'm not sure if you pronounce his name Patton or Peyton. I've heard it both ways. Normally Patton would be 2 T's, but that it really doesn't matter. So, by the way, as we get started, let's see. Yeah, the midterm is due tonight. You're aware of that, right? How many, are you working on other midterms today too?
Yeah. Just one.
Okay. All right. All right. And then on Friday, you have the reading from chapter 6 in Cloudwork. And Sharon, you're on Monday. All right. Hudson Taylor. Okay. Yeah, here's another Scottish missionary. Yeah, Ella?
Do you have the attendance sheet?
My wife even puts Post-it notes on my notebook sometime, and I carry it to class, and I carry it back to the office with a Post-it note there and everything. I forget to do it. Thanks for reminding me. So who else do we know was born in Scotland?
Mary Slessor.
Mary Slessor?
The Moffat.
Moffat and
Livingston.
Livingston were both Scottish as well. And quite a few came out of Scotland. He was born in a poor family. He had to go to work at a young age. That's back before the days of labor laws and things like that, right? And there was a ministry in Glasgow, England, that he participated in when he came to Christ. And so he did like a lot of the missionaries we studied. He got married and got on board a ship, went to the mission field. He goes to Tana. Now, Tana is, I'm not even sure if you can locate it. It's a very small place. But he gets there, and what part of the world are we in right now?
The islands?
Yeah, we call this, what's that?
I would say South Pacific, but never.
Yeah, it is. We sometimes refer to it as Australia and the South Pacific. Do you remember the 3 categories of islands that we talked about, the 3 groupings of islands? Thanks. Do you remember what those are called? They all end in nesia. One of them is amnesia. No, just kidding. That's what you're experiencing right now, right? What are they?
Micronesia.
Micronesia, which means very small, small islands, and
Polynesia.
wait, what, I'm sorry. What'd you say, Matthew?
I was gonna guess Indonesia, but I don't think that's right.
That's different. That's amnesia, but that's a different one. That's actually in the same neighborhood. Yes, but it's not considered part of that region. What'd you say?
I said Polynesia.
Polynesia, because of many islands, and the other one maybe isn't as well known. Melanesia, which means dark, because the people are dark skinned. Okay, just a reminder where we are in the world. So culture shock. Everybody experiences it. Could any of you say that you've experienced, kind of pretty heavy doses of culture shock on a missions trip or somewhere?
A lot of people who went with me in Kazakhstan did, but I don't think I did.
Okay,
It's because I was around Americans a lot, so it
okay.
wasn't that bad.
Some of the ones from First Family?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Because some of them were more immersed in the culture.
yeah. And it's one thing to experience it when you're only there for a short time. It's another thing to experience it probably like you did, Miriam, coming and knowing you're going to be here for a while. And that makes culture shock a whole different thing. All right, so what shocked him? Well, the moral situation, we've talked about that already. It was just, really shocking to him. The illness and death of Mary, his wife, and their little baby. How many times have we seen wives, children dying, on the field? And not just wives, but husbands also. And native workers, the relief of there were native workers that helped, but sometimes, they were a blessing. Sometimes they were mistreated by some of the missionary personnel. Then measles killed a third of the island people. That's incredible. An epidemic like that, killing 1/3. And then there's Civil War, and he narrowly escapes. Remember, they had to hide, and they thought they were going to die. They were able to get out of the house where they were and make it safely away. So, you put all that together, what's going to keep you there? If you have this combination of things happening to you, what keeps a person on the field?
Would it have to be like they really felt like God was calling them there?
Yeah. It had to be a really, really strong conviction. And what fuels that conviction? Well, that's probably not the right way I want to answer it. It's Jesus Christ himself. It's the glory of God and our intimacy with Christ that's going to sustain us in a situation like this. If our decision to serve Christ is only based on, data or, theological presuppositions, propositions, and things like that, probably not going to hold up. But when we have a walk with Christ and we're convinced that he is in this, and he loves us and he wants to use us, we can stick with it until God takes us. So eventually he goes off to Australia. Remember, Australia is part of this big, in fact, isn't it true that Australia is considered to be an island? Check that online real quick. See if you come up with a site that, if you look for, largest islands in the world, I think some people may put Australia in that. Let me know if they do.
It does say it's an island country and a continent.
So, okay,
So it's both.
kind of a combo.
Mine says Australia can't be an island because it's already a continent.
Okay, so it depends on how you define. And some would call it an island nation because it's completely surrounded by water, right? So for that reason, some would say it's an island nation or an island continent. So it kind of depends. All right. So, yeah, and he's like, remember John Williams? He wrote a book, told a lot of stories, he became a hero. Well, Patton did too. A lot of these guys, remember, there weren't a whole lot of missionary biographies and stories published at this time. So when these guys published books with, telling these stories, they really caught on. Now we are so inundated with that kind of stuff that, you can read a missionary story and it may or may not, have the same impact. And he did get some financial backing. What's the Dayspring?
A ship.
It's a boat. Yeah, it's a ship. Remember that John Williams had an engineering background, welding and stuff. So he was iron worker. They were able to make a ship. But Patton, he's able to raise money to purchase a ship for their work. All right. He ends up getting remarried, and he returns to the New Hebrides, which is a small collection of islands there. And he just about ruins his ministry. He's on board of a British Commodore, and he's on board of a ship. It's a man of war ship. It's an attack ship, and he's on board with the British Commodore. What's he doing on board of a ship, of a military ship? Why would he be on board a military ship? the answer to this question is why a lot of these missionaries did this. Why would they get on board military ships or commercial ships?
Is it for protection?
Well, they may have gotten some protection, although he just about got killed over it. It was just, they would get whatever means of transportation they could. Most people didn't have the luxury of purchasing a day spring, a big ship like that. So a lot of these missionaries would just find whoever's traveling, and sometimes these military ships would have some space on them, and you pay a fee, and they would give you a ride. So he ends up being on this man of war with a British Commodore, and he becomes associated with the British, and this hits the news media, and all of a sudden he becomes branded for something that he had nothing to do with. I mean, the only thing he did was he rode this thing. Because he's on board with a British Commodore, he's being branded as politically sympathetic to their cause or whatever. So there's a good lesson in that. Just because something is practical doesn't necessarily mean it's the wisest thing to do. There may be shortcuts or ways and means that you can take advantage of, and especially if you're in a foreign country, make sure that you understand what kinds of associations or implications there could be for doing something like that. Okay. Now, whether he knew that was risky or not, I don't know. But the news media loves. I mean, we talk about our news media today. It was no different back then. They were always looking for a good story. They didn't care, at whose cost that would be, whose life they were jeopardizing. They just want a story, and that's what they did. They got this idea that this guy has military sympathies, and he didn't. So, we talk about this with regard to other missionaries too. Be careful if you're in a foreign country how much you get involved politically, because foreigners don't typically understand politics the way the nationals do. And even if you do, the very fact that you're a foreigner makes you a lightning rod. I don't know if that makes lightning rod. Does that make sense to you? That means your lightning rods attract lightning. And so when we say he's a lightning rod, that means he's always attracting a lot of attention or something like that. And so, I know people who have gotten involved in politics as missionaries, and some have been very successful. They've been able to use it, for a good cause. But you have to be really, really careful about doing that. All right. And then he eventually moves to another island location called Aniwa, and God gives him a fruitful ministry there. Okay. He eventually, like a lot of guys, like John Williams and others, they become a missionary statesman. How would you describe a statesman? When we say he's a missionary statesman, what does that mean?
Is it like the idea of a statesman here? Or like, was he involved in the politics and kind of like a representative of the area?
It's not, in this case, it's not so much of a political statement as it is the idea that this guy is an authority as a missionary. Okay, he is a veteran. Sometimes we'll use the word veteran today. And even today, you probably could hear somebody referred to as a missionary statesman. It's the idea of somebody that has a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge. This guy is an expert when it comes to missionary work. He's a statesman. I think that's the idea. And so he became known as an authority on missions in his later years of life. Okay, so there's the New Hebrides, all right? It just sprinkled right there. And of course, here you have Papua New Guinea over here on this half, and then Indonesia is on this half here. So, and here's Australia, so you can kind of see the relationship. Here's New Zealand down here, and kind of get the idea of the location where they are. I don't know if anybody's bothered to count how many islands there are in the South Pacific. Hey, do that real quick. Somebody Google that. How many islands in the
I thought
South?
you meant to like count it on there.
No. So how many islands in the South Pacific? I don't know if they have an exact number. If you get a number, let me know.
I think 30,000.
30,000, all right? And I think these are all guesstimates because, and a lot of those islands are actually owned by the federal government and they're used as places to land strategic, aircraft and stuff like that. If they're trying to, if they have to head a certain way, make a shortcut to get someplace in a wartime. And so a lot of times, even when people settle on those islands, the islands belong to the government. And so anytime the government needs them, they can just tell the people, sorry, you have to leave. And there are lots of them. We wouldn't know what they all are because the government's not going to tell us. A lot of those are, just military secrets. One thing that I think is important to keep in mind, there has been quite a migration even from the Middle East all the way down into this region. And so there is a lot of Islamic, what country has the greatest population of Muslims? It's the one you were saying. Indonesia. Not necessarily a percentage, but the largest number of Muslims in the world is in Indonesia, okay? And part of that is because there's been a migration all the way from as far as the Middle East, and Islamic faith, came with them. Quite interesting. So if you're going to minister in that part of the world, there's a very good chance you will come across Muslim people somewhere along the way. A lot of animism too, obviously, on the islands and that sort of thing. Okay? All right, yeah, there's Tahiti and just some other ones. So, okay. All right, I don't know why I put so many pictures here, but anyway. All right, so speaking of Muslims, let's shift gears now and leave the Pacific Islands and talk about Muslim missions. I don't know if we mentioned this or not, but actually missions in these Pacific Islands has been considered to be some of the most successful missions but I'm really, really hesitant to define success because our tendency is to define success how?
The numbers.
Yeah, statistics. And even, I'm not opposed to statistics, but I am concerned about the weight that we give to numbers to decide who's being successful and who's not. I would urge you to be really, really careful about that, okay? So I just want to talk about different kinds or approaches to Muslim missions. And this could be true of other groups as well, but because of the perceived hostility of Muslims and the Islamic faith, people have really studied what's the best way to approach them. And one way is confrontational. You have public debates, and you write polemic literature. Now, interesting, Raymond Lull's name comes there, but that is actually not the way he wanted to do it. Do you happen to remember, what was his original strategy for reaching Muslims? This is way back beginning of the semester. What was his approach for reaching Muslims? Remember how he didn't end up doing it the way he said he wanted to? But what was his idea? He wanted to do it through friendships, through conversation, very peacefully, but he ended up becoming very confrontational. Yeah. Traditional evangelism, okay, through relationships. This is Samuel Zwemer, a well-known missionary among the Muslims. He really tried to build relationships in order to be able to reach people. Which comes to shove, that's the approach that I think personally is probably by and large the most effective. Being able to rub shoulders with people, make friendships, and help them come to Christ. Institutional, use medical ministry or educational centers. You teach English or whatever. Okay, there's an opportunity for you to have an in with the gospel. Dialogical has to do with respectful interaction. Temple Gardner did that. He was a guy who tried to interact in a very respectful way. Some people have taken that too far. They've said, You can't say anything against the Muslim faith or against the Quran if you're going to reach them. So we try to make the Bible and Quran equal, equal partners in our discussion. That's taking it too far because now you've pretty much lost your authority to preach the gospel as the message of Christ. Contextual, that's the idea of becoming culturally immersed. You become as much like a Muslim as you can, even in the way you dress. So like missionary wives may wear coverings because they feel like that's culturally acceptable. And if they don't wear head coverings, they might be culturally rejected. It'd be very difficult for them to have an in. So these are all different ways, or combinations of these ways that people have tried to reach Muslim. Any one of those strike you? If you were going to try to minister to Muslim people, what kind of approach might you use? Or don't you know? Maybe it just
I feel
depends.
like all of them kind of have their place.
They do. That's a good answer, Ella. That's probably the best answer. Because not all Muslims are alike. We tend to look at, all Buddhists are alike, all Muslims are alike, all Hindus are alike, and they're not. Yeah, in England, we were there visiting. We visited a guy we were in a town called Luton, right? It's 20 miles or so from London, 93% Muslim in that city. But super nice guy, a Muslim, a very strong practicing Muslim guy, fixed a meal for us. It was absolutely delicious. Pretty hot, pretty spicy hot. But he did it as a hospital. But he stood up there and he told us about his faith and why he believes and why he thought Christianity was wrong and everything, But we had a meal together and it was very interesting. But yeah, different. I think there are different ways of
Definitely
doing it.
depends on the country. Because here in the States, we could have maybe confrontational public debates. If you try to debate publicly something in maybe Saudi Arabia, it's not going to go through.
Yeah.
In other places, you can be more open in your relationships. But like I said, it's something that's more closed off. You'd have to get in through being a doctor.
Right. Right. Good. So what are some barriers to Muslim outreach? Well, you have associates. Was that supposed to do that? Sometimes that wasn't supposed to do that. See, I was supposed to give you one at a time. Sociological, which means how do you live in that society? And you have to actually see our country. We make a huge difference between religion and public life. And so, but in some Muslim cultures, there's not a difference. The politics and the religion pretty much are one and the same. There's obviously theological differences. Name a couple of key theological differences between Muslims and Christians.
Well, I think Jesus is just a prophet.
Okay, he's a prophet. He's not God. What else?
Is it work-based?
Yeah, it is definitely work-based. Yep, and you never know until you get there, if you're going. Some believe that if you die in a jihad, in a war, you automatically are guaranteed heaven and 70 virgins, things like that. Just crazy. Denial of the Trinity, which shouldn't surprise us, and other things like that. Political barriers. Yeah, the democratic system. Remember after World War I, was it Woodrow Wilson or somebody else that said now, the world is now safe for democracy? That sounded really nice, but it was a very short-sighted statement. When somebody says the world is safe for democracy, they're revealing their ignorance of the way people think and the way leadership is understood in community and all that, because for some people, democracy is an absolutely shameful way of doing things, an irresponsible way of doing things. So, those kinds of things happen. And then cultural. Sociological and cultural are there's a lot of overlap. Sociology has to do more with, just the way you relate to people in society. I guess culture is too. Culture asks the question, why are they this way? Why do they do what they do? Now, these same barriers exist in ministry to other people groups as well, right? Hindus, Buddhists, and so on. All right, we got to talk about Henry Martyn. He ministered to Muslims, right? He was born in England, 1871. By the way, when did Islam begin? Muslim faith. Can you give me a round figure of approximately when Islam began?
This says 610 when I looked it up.
Yeah, the first vision from the angel Gabriel, according to the story, right? Early 600s. Yeah. Okay. Actually, some would say that Henry Martyn really wasn't a missionary. He was a chaplain of the East India Company. Now, how did the East India Company feel about missions? We talked about the East India Company. I think we did. I know we did. How did the East India Company feel about missionary activity?
They didn't trust them because they thought they were traitors. Traitors like the D,
They didn't trust who?
the missionaries.
Why would they think they're traitors? You mean traitors? Like,
No, with the D, like trading goods, right?
oh, well, that, okay.
Not with the islands.
Well, that's, yeah, the East India Company was a commercial company. I mean, they were in India and other places in order to do business, right? But they believed, what were the missionaries trying to do that posed a threat to the East India Company?
And if they try to put kids in schools,
Mm-hmm. They believed, because if you're going to teach people the Word of God, teach them to think, then they need to be educated. And so missionaries promoted education. They promoted literacy, okay? And the East India Company didn't like either one of those, because if we keep them illiterate and uneducated, then we can manipulate them with our business practices. Hmm? So missionaries posed a threat to the East India Company. So he went as a chaplain of the East India Company, but as a chaplain, he tried to, go beyond that limited sphere and minister to the people there. And it was hard, really hard. He was influenced by the death of his own father and by the writings of David Brainerd. So here's David Brainerd cropping up again. 5 years of ministry, and yet his writings continue to inspire people. He's another one that believed that self-denial was important to prepare to serve God. Who else did we study kind of recently that also uses self-denial as a way to prepare for service?
Was that Hudson Taylor?
Yep. Taylor did some pre-self-denial activity to toughen himself up. And that's what Martyn did as well. I don't remember, does it say specifically what he did? That I don't remember. But he did something. Oh, here we go. Eating in a cold place. Yeah, I think I made a mistake. I think I mentioned Taylor doing that. It really wasn't Hudson Taylor. I mean, he might have done something like that too, but Henry Martyn's the guy that would actually eat away from the fireplace. Normally in those days, when the fire was warm and you'd have your table and chair right there by the fireplace to eat, he would purposely eat away from the fire. We were to have to deal with the cold. And he decided to practice celibacy. I'm going to be a single missionary, until he met Lydia Grenfell. She, it takes a woman author to say it the way, let me see if I can find that here. Hang on. Let's see, if you find it ahead of me, let me know. But, let's see. Okay. I'm on page 236. Celibacy was another aspect of his self-denial. He was thankful that he was delivered from all desires for the comforts of married life, he wrote, preferring the single life in which we have much greater opportunities for heavenly mindedness. But that was before he fell helplessly in love with Lydia Grenfell. So, Ruth Tuckerman, his cousin's sister-in-law, who was 6 years older than he. It was this idolatrous affection that more than anything else distracted him from his single-minded goal of following in the footsteps of Brainerd. he wrote, I felt too plainly that I loved her passionately. The direct opposition of this to my devotedness to God in the missionary way excited no small tumult in my mind, end quote. Lydia had captured his heart. He could not stop thinking about her, waking in the night with his mind full of her. So what did he do? Well, just skipping down a little bit, it says he was convinced that he could more effectively serve God unencumbered by marriage. It was highly doubtful whether Lydia would have accompanied him to a foreign land anyway. He spent most of a year making plans to sail to India, all the while pining over Lydia, but claiming to be cheerfully resigned to do the will of God and to forego the earthly joy of marriage. What do you think of that?
I think there are some times when you can serve God better in missions married, and sometimes you can serve God better separate, and it's not really an issue of what you think is best, but more what God places in your life, what He calls you to.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessarily a good idea to just say, well, I'm going to not get married because I feel like that's like, I don't know, self-denial, or I don't know. Like that can also become like a pride issue too.
Because somebody that makes those statements he made may tend to look at people that get married and go to the mission field as being, less than devoted. That's where you have to be really, really careful. This was true sometimes of Catholic monks. They would take celibacy vows, and many times they arrogantly felt like they were the ones who were true followers of Jesus, while others were enjoying the earthly pleasures of marriage and family. That's where you really have to be cautious. Okay. Just remember that, and I agree with you, Laurel, that God's plan, even in the same place, is not necessarily the same for each person. Yeah. So be careful of that. He goes to India in 1805. That's right around the time that Lewis and Clark are on their expedition, if you want a connection there. My state of Ohio became a state in 1803, and that Thomas Jefferson was president at that time. But this guy wasn't from the U.S. anyway, he's from England. And so he meets William Carey. Okay, who else met William Carey when they became missionaries? Who went to the mission field and met William Carey, but didn't actually stay there and work with him and went on from there? All right, here's the clicker, and became a Baptist on the way.
Judson.
Yeah, Judson, right? He stopped and met Carey and his guys. All right. Henry Martin had a love for Bible translation. Now, have you all seen the Arabic language, what it looks like? In fact, if you were in prayer band Monday night, they showed some Arabic. It's a beautiful, I think it's one of the most beautiful languages in terms of just aesthetic appeal. It's really, really beautiful, but very, very difficult. And look at this guy. How old is he when he dies? 31 years old. I mean, this is like another David Brainerd. Interesting. He was inspired by the writings of David Brainerd. And in God's providence, he ends up living and ministering about as long as David Brainerd did. It's kind of ironic. So when you think of David Brainerd, think of Henry Martin. There are parallels between the two of them. One influenced the other. They both ministered, very short lives of ministry. He ends up dying. So, what's he remembered for? He's remembered for his devotion to Christ, his desire to minister to Muslims, his determination to go and do it, even though he had feelings for a lady. He didn't let that. So.
Do you think he would have been better off getting married? If that's the case for somebody, would you tell them you should just get married or not?
Yeah, that's a hard question to answer. What if he had? Muslim world, if you have a wife, it may help, it may serve as a protection for you. If you're a single man there, you have to be extremely careful about the way you handle yourself around women, especially in a Muslim culture. Very, very sensitive. You can get yourself in trouble really fast. If you're married, that probably serves as something of a protection for you. But you can't put God in a box. I think God chose to use Henry Martyn. I think if God wanted to be, I mean, it's not like this lady was burdened to go to the Muslim world to ministry. He said, no, I'm going to be single. The indication is she probably didn't have any interest in missions anyway. So, but I don't know. That's just a hard one to answer, Ella. And if I give you a one-sided answer, then what do you do about all the cases on the other side? It's just hard to do. Yep. Every case is different. Next week during missions conference, I would encourage you to be careful. Appreciate the situation in which those missionaries have served, but don't assume that that's the right way. They're doing it the wrong way. This guy said this other guy said that. This guy sounds like he's got it right. Be careful, because God has used so many, many, many different kinds of people in varying circumstances to get his work done. It's really important that you're sensitive to the Lord and seeking his direction. Yep. Maud Carey, we got a few minutes. We can talk about her, about 10 minutes here. Ever heard of her before reading this? She a new one? All right, single gal. So Henry Martyn, single guy. David Brainerd, single. That's another thing they had in common, right? Both of them, neither one of them ever got married, and they both had a love life. There's just a lot of interesting parallels. So Maud Carey is going to Africa and to Morocco. Actually, one of the Bible readings at conference on Thursday is going to be in Moroccan Arabic. It's a dialect of the Arabic language from Morocco. And so Maud Carey, what about her? Well, she was from Kansas, right? Born on a farm. We got a lot of people. The whole Fincham crowd, well, I shouldn't say a whole, but a lot of them come from Kansas, a lot of on that area. 1878, okay? And she came from a godly home where missions was emphasized, and so she had a lot of exposure to missions in her home. Excuse me. Her mother was talented. She was a musician. She was a teacher, and so Maud Carey had a lot of exposure to that. She was very independent, like her mother. So who are the independent people in the room? Anybody here consider yourself an independent person? Ella, you are? It's your way or the highway, huh? All right. She enrolled at Gospel Missionary Union Institute. Now, the Gospel Missionary Union was an agency that, even when we were missionaries in Brazil, there were people with GMU, Gospel Missionary Union, in Fortaleza. They've now changed their name to Avant Ministries, but it's still a legitimate agency. So she enrolled there, and she sails from Morocco in 1901. Wow. So she's born in 1878, so she's what, 23 when she heads for Morocco. Pretty young. Close to you guys, a little older. Yeah. What do you think? I mean, single gal, right? Going all by herself. Now, I told you it might be kind of tough for a single guy to minister in the Muslim world. What about a single gal? Going to a Muslim place to be a missionary.
I think, though, being a single gal, there would be unique opportunities there that you wouldn't have as a single guy. I mean, like, it would still be really hard.
Okay. Well, like, you think of what
Like,
kind?
you would be able to minister to other women and be a lot less threatening.
Okay. One thing that some single women tried to do in a Muslim context was reach families through the wives, and many times the husbands would cut it off because women were viewed not as decision makers, and they didn't like the idea that a single woman was trying to convince their wives to leave the Muslim faith. So a lot of times husbands would just finally, they'd cut off the friendship and say, you are not allowed to associate with this person anymore. Because the role of the man is very domineering in the Muslim world. And so if you try to go to the family through the wife, it's going to be very, very difficult. Not that it could never work, but it's very hard. In my opinion, the best approach, you try to reach the man. Same thing, if you go through children's ministry there, there's liable to be a reaction. I'm not saying it can't work. Maybe you'll hear something at conference about it working, Like I said, you can't put God in a box. 4 others went with her. She didn't go alone on this trip, okay? And she would spend 50 years there. So she's 23 when she goes. She'd be about 83 when she's finishing her ministry there. That's amazing. But she would struggle with pride and independence. Got it from her mother, right? So Ella, watch out. Just kidding. Look, who else was a single missionary that struggled with not being allowed more space to minister, not being allowed more opportunities? Or maybe we haven't studied. Have we studied Lottie Moon yet? We haven't come to Lottie Moon, have we? I'm sorry, I'm mixing this up with Intro to Missions because we did a section there. Yeah, a lot of these single gals really struggled because they felt like the men, not just the men in the culture, but missionary personnel were stifling their potential to serve. And some of them, she complained about it. Maud Carey was one that complained about it. And if I remember right, they even thought about pulling her off the field because she got kind of vocal about it. And she had to learn to deal with that and not insist on having her way. Okay. There were some challenges in the Morocco villages. Barking dogs. Oh, come on, really? Yeah. Look, I think it was probably a lot like in Brazil. When we talk about barking dogs, we're talking about middle of the night, 2 in the morning, all of a sudden you got these dogs wailing and barking. And then you got these dogs mating. Street dogs were constantly mating. And when they mated, they would howl. And it was horrible. I remember one time getting up in the middle of the night and going out the gate and just starting to throw stones at a dog. I knew it wasn't going to work, but I was so upset because I was trying to sleep. I had classes the next day and I needed to get rest. And I just kind of lost it one night. When I started chucking stones, Men, here's what I just said, men impeding their wives from listening. You can't talk to her about that. I'm the leader of our home. We serve Allah. And we're followers of Muhammad. We do not follow that. You are not permitted to talk to her. That was hard. So who's she going to talk to? Can she go directly to the husbands and talk to them? Not in that culture, you don't. Yeah.
I have a friend, well, my mom's friend, but she's a single gal serving in like Iran or something.
Mm-hmm.
So she's very much like this, where she like kind of dresses with the culture and she's like kind of an undercover missionary. But I think she has a ministry to men and teaches men, but it's more like she's teaching them English. And so
different.
then it's like, it is different, but then she's like also like doing Bible studies and like ministering to them.
With men?
Mhm.
Yeah, that's unusual. I've never heard of that before. So I guess that's the exception that confirms the rule. Maybe if we knew more about the situation where she was, the area, maybe that would help explain it,
Sure.
Yeah, but things like English, things like women are considered to be, qualified, respectable, even in that location. But Bible studies, yeah, that surprises me. Men. And yeah, because of her independence, she got some criticism from her colleagues. Did not appreciate her vocal opinions. And as I said, they even thought about getting her off the field. We can't shut this woman up, get her off the field. Oops. But I just remember it's a little harder. It's not like, okay, you need to leave tomorrow, there's a flight out of here. No, if you're gonna leave there, it's months on a boat and all that. It's a lot more complicated. We got just a few minutes. Let me just open this one up and then I'll let you go. I'm trying to catch up a little bit here. Let's shift gears to Korea and Japan, okay? Now, when did the split, just a little history here, when did the split in Korea take place from North to South Korea? Remember your history? Well, you remember the Korean War? Okay. World War II ends in 1945. The Korean War takes place in 1950, and there was a split. And MacArthur wanted to go right on through Korea and on into China. He saw the handwriting on the wall for communist China, but they didn't let him. And so, there's a lot of history behind there, but this is before that. Korea was actually called the Hermit Kingdom. What does hermit mean?
It's kind of isolated.
Isolated. Yep. And actually, Japan was even more isolated than for a longer time, being an island nation. So Korea really didn't have a lot of interaction with the outside world until the end of the 19th century. And it was also unique as a recipient of American Protestant missionaries. See, it's right next door to Japan. When missionaries went to Japan, it was much more difficult for the Japanese to accept them. Part of that is because Buddhism had become very established there. But in Korea, there really wasn't one major religion that dominated the country. You couldn't say that, oh, Koreans are Buddhist or Koreans are Islamic or whatever. There really wasn't. So that was one of the differences between Japan and Korea. So when Protestant missionaries went to Korea, there was a greater willingness to listen to them than there would have been in Japan. Okay. Korea, where the name of God is indigenous, they actually had an indigenous name for God, Hananim. I don't know what name they would use for the God of the Bible today. That I can't tell you. We actually have somebody reading Korean in our reading next week. You know who that is? Who's Korean at our school?
Sunny.
Yeah, Sunny. She's born in Korea. Her parents ministered in Brazil as missionaries, still do, I think. And now she's here in the States. She's Korean. I have to ask her that question. And then Korea, where indigenization happened more quickly. And we'll talk next time. Time is up now, but we'll talk next time about the Nevius method. There's an interesting story there about what happened when he went to Korea. But we'll wait until Monday to do that. All right, Friday, reading the chapter 6. We'll discuss it. Bring your at least 3 comments so we can talk together. Thank you.
For our midterm,